Good evening. Welcome to tonight's presentation, Rudolph Valentino, The Tango was the Step to Stardom. My name's Nikki. My colleague in the background who's working the buttons is Susie. Um, One of the great things about doing these events and doing them online is we're able to have speakers who we'd never be able to have live in one of our libraries. Tonight's speaker, Donna Hill, is currently in San Francisco. One thing to note is that there's work being done on the apartment above her. So if you hear any drilling or anything, just apologies for that. It means someone's getting a new bathroom. Donna's written extensively on Rudolph Valentino. I'm sure she's going to tell you details of her book, and you'll get details sent to you after the event. She's also blogged a lot about him. She runs a blog on Old Hollywood, which you'll find out about. And having had a sneak preview of this presentation, I know you're going to have a really good time. Just one thing, if you've got questions, put in the Q&A. If you just move your mouse down at the bottom, it's useful to us. We love to see your comments, and people do make really interesting comments and have discussions during it, so that's great. But if you've got an actual question, it would be really helpful if you just put a couple of question marks at the end, so because sometimes we get so many, it's useful to be able to distinguish the questions from the comments. Okay, over to you, Donna.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Susie. And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I hope you enjoy it, and we can get started. Okay, Valentino was born with a very lofty Latin name, as you can see. He was the third of four children. His eldest sister, unfortunately, died at the age of 2. And then he had the other life-changing issue when his father died when he was just 10 years old. While they were not poor, the Guglielmi family was decidedly middle class, and his father, Giovanni, was a veterinarian, and his mother, Gabriella, was an accomplished seamstress. He grew up bilingual, speaking Italian and French. His mother was French. The other life-changing early life event for him was when the family left Castellaneta and moved to Toronto, which was not terribly far away, but for him it was an entire world. Being from a small town, he now lived in a larger city and was a small fish in a big pond, and he was the proverbial troublesome middle child. Here he is on the left with his brother Alberto. He's about age 2 here. And then you can see him circled on the right on his football team. I'm not sure if this was at one of the schools he attended, but it was the death of his father that simultaneously filled him with guilt for not living up to his father's expectations, and his grief spurred him on to be a much more troublesome boy. And you can see slightly in the photo that he looks a little bit surly as the young football player. He never enjoyed the restrictions nor the punishments of regular schooling. And again, after his father died, his mother was able to send him to a military type school and technical school near Genoa to see if some discipline could be drilled into him. He most certainly enjoyed the outdoor sports. He took up the equestrian events, and he also enjoyed his discovery of mechanics with farm machinery and cars. In the notes for his that survive for his scholastic achievements, he was most noted for his penmanship, which, as you can see, was pretty nice. His last 2 portraits, taken in 1913, after he had finagled his way to being shipped off to America. The photo on the left is the one used on his identity card, and the photo on the right, you can see that he invested in some formal wear, and he wanted to make the best impression that he was not your typical Southern Italian immigrant, you know, unlettered, untutored, and coarse. The photographer added the monocle, and I suspect it was probably at his own suggestion that they do so, giving him a sophisticated look that he really couldn't pull off at this age of 18. He traveled across on the USS Cleveland. He upgraded immediately his second-class passage to first class, showing early on that he was profligate with money, and that sadly would continue throughout his life. The image on the right is the envelope. I could not find, I have at least one or two images of the actual letter he wrote to his mother, but I couldn't find them. He started a newsy letter as soon as they embarked. And I don't know if you can read this, but he certainly did not hide his disdain for people in second or third class, as you can see. But he soon settled in, making friends, where he practiced the little English that he knew and conversed in French and Italian with the other passengers. Halfway through this letter, he mentions that he did want to keep a diary in this letter, but he did not have time. And he wrote, I had in mind to write you a diary, but I did not have the time due to studying and enjoying myself. This is his card that he had created and handed out to other passengers and handed out when he arrived in New York. Continuing in his letter, he anticipated his mother's disapproval of his profligate ways. He was a very eager social climber, and his charm was utilized in every aspect of his life on board the ship. He made some contacts, though in the end, they seemed to have not done him any good once he arrived in the US. But he was a little bit of a snob, as you can see. Once he arrived in New York, life was not terribly easy for him, but he made friends easily and was eager to explore New York and the rest of the country. He brought a camera with him, having been a camera buff as early as I can have ever discovered about him. And he sent home with his letters many snapshots to show his mother how well he was doing. And this is not to say that things were always good, but he did enjoy having his photo taken, taking photos, and visiting. And he also posed for the formal portrait on the left, and it's inscribed to his brother. So, you know, that he wanted to show them that he was doing well. His various jobs were, you know, working in restaurants. He worked as an agricultural gardener, which is something that he had, you know, a degree for, so to speak. But he ended up falling into the line of dancing, and he worked at various Tango palaces, as they would be called, and taught dancing lessons. He related to his mother that he quickly acquainted himself with ladies of high society and learned the dances of the day. So, you know, once he became a taxi dancer and dancing instructor, he became a little bit well known. And when Bonnie Glass, who was a famed dancer of the day, needed a new partner, he replaced Clifton Webb briefly as her partner. They danced at Rector's, which was a large restaurant club, and also Bonnie Glass had her own club where they danced. She soon retired, and he went on to make a new partnership. And here's one of the few surviving photos of Valentino and Bonnie Glass. They are costumed for the Apache dance. And this is quite rare, and I was very happy to be able to use this in my book, thanks to the Valentino family. So once Bonnie Glass retired, Valentino joined up with Joan Sawyer, and they danced in vaudeville on the B.F. Keith circuit, and this is a program from their Washington, D.C. appearance. They closed the first half, which showed that they were quite high up in billing. And while in DC, they also danced for President Woodrow Wilson. And this is a portrait of Valentino, interestingly signed with his real name, which is very rare. I think I've only seen one or two images where he actually signed his legal name. But this is right around the time he was dancing with Bonnie Glass and Joan Sawyer. And he was not quite a star, but he was on the ascent. it's not quite sure how he came to work in film or to make the jump into film. But while in New York, he made his first forays, and he was an extra in the film with Jack Pickford. And this is the earliest known footage of Valentino from the 1916 film. It's a serial called Patria, which starred Irene Castle, who was also a famous dancer, and Milton Sills. So let's see if we can get this to work. Blink and you will miss him. It's not known whether or not Valentino is in any other parts of Patria. It doesn't survive in complete condition. I think there's only about 7 episodes, but he's only in episode 3 of the surviving footage. Here he is. You can spot him behind Jack Pickford as an extra in the lost film 17. Pickford made several films with Louise Huff. They were a young early partnership of society comedies. And again, this was filmed in New York. In between his engagement as a partner to Joan Sawyer and his burgeoning career as a film extra, Rudy was beset by scandals in New York, the first being his involvement with socialite Blanca de Sales. And the second was his arrest by the Vice Squad in 1916. There's too much to go into here, but I can recommend that you pay a visit to a blog by my friend Simon Constable. It's called His Fame Still Lives, and I'll share a link to that later. But Simon has uncovered some amazing documentation of Valentino's life in New York, and due to the scandals, he had to hot-foot it out of New York because he was pretty much unemployable. He joined the cast of A Masked Model, and this is a photo that was taken in Denver, Colorado. He would leave the company somewhere between Reno, Nevada, and San Francisco. It's not clear whether or not he was fired or whether he left on his own. I don't know, but there is a hilariously wrong newspaper article stating that it's he dancing with one of the ladies in the cast, and the person pictured is absolutely not him. But at least he did get a few mentions in this musical review. Valentino spent 6 months in San Francisco, where he got a job selling insurance bonds. And in a letter that survives, his mother wrote to him that she was very proud of him, that he was taking legitimate work. He himself admitted he was not a success at all selling bonds door to door. I think I would have bought some if he'd knocked on my door. He found friends in San Francisco in high society. He visited Tate's Cafe and shadier places along the Barbary Coast. He also met up with a friend from New York, Norman Kaiser, who was known in films as Norman Carey. And Carey convinced him to come to Los Angeles to try his luck in film, since he was not much of a success in San Francisco selling bonds. And dancing in cafes was not giving him the money he needed to live his life. So in 1917, he got very lucky and won a lead role in a film that was titled The Married Virgin. Unfortunately, his luck did not hold out, since the film didn't have a release until long after Valentino had become a star. But it's one of the first fully realized roles. It's a very good film for the era. His performance is quite good as a villainous count, and it is available if you want to watch it. It's a fun movie. But soon after, his filming The Married Virgin, he spent more time bouncing between small roles as thugs and crooks and just plain extras. And this particular shot is from a film called A Rogue's Romance. And you can see that he looks very much the part of a Bowery tough. In 1918, he was, like many other people, was struck down for a time where he contracted the Spanish flu. Sadly, right around that same time, he was grieved to learn from a letter from his sister that his mother had passed away that January. He was, grief-stricken. He was very close to his mother, and he was devastated that she was not able to live to see him gain some fame and fortune. It also explains his true affection for mother figures he adopted among his colleagues and later amongst marital relations. He had a very good relationship with his mother-in-law. He enjoyed later on when he made Blood and Sand with Rosa Nova, a very warm relationship. And although they weren't too many years apart, I think June Mathis would also fall under that category. He had heard that D.W. Griffith was going to make Broken Blossoms, and it is reported that he posed for these photos, and I believe these are by Russell Ball, in order to try and audition for the part that ultimately went to Richard Barthelmess. Valentino was not someone that D.W. Griffith recognized talent or any potential. Needless to say, he didn't get the part. But one Griffith player who did recognize Valentino was Dorothy Gish. By 1919, she had left Griffith and was making a series of successful comedies for Paramount, one of which is called Out of Luck. And Rudy was not the hero, nor did he get the girl. But behind the scenes, he was very friendly with Dorothy and Lillian, and he was especially fond of their mother. And Dorothy related later on in life that he would come to their house, visiting with their mother, and make spaghetti, and that it was absolutely delicious. In late 1919, Valentino impulsively married his fellow actor, Gene Acker. They had met a few months earlier. Both were unhappy and lonely and formed a friendship. The marriage, as we know, did not last. It was not consummated, as far as we know. He was a prodigious flirt from a young age, and he came to America not only with a tuxedo, he also arrived with a social disease. That was something that he brought back with him from Venice one early year. Whether he confessed it to Gene Acker or whether she confessed her bisexuality will never be known. He continued to correspond with her after their brief marriage and left 3 ardently inscribed portraits long after their wedding night. This one is inscribed, "To my Aphrodite." Whether he knew anything about her sexual orientation, we don't know, but it seems clear, at least within the first weeks of their marriage, as it was, he did not know. In 1919, fate finally stepped in and luck turned once Valentino appeared in the film The Eyes of Youth. In this, he's playing yet another villain, a paid correspondent who entraps Clara Kimball Young. Someone of great importance managed to see this film, and it turned his career completely around. You can see that he was quite adept at being a villain. And here he is pictured with the cast. Albert Parker was the director. So the person who saw him was and was determined to cast him in the huge Metro project, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, was June Mathis. It's not recorded what she saw in him that she felt he could take on such a large role, but I think from the previous clip it's a little obvious that he certainly was smooth and comfortable in front of the camera. Now Metro paid a huge sum of money for this, the rights to the book. Blasco Ibanez was a firm and determined businessman, and I believe this what they paid for the Four Horsemen was quite a lot of money, $170,000 in 1920, quite a sum. Once the film was announced, it was to be written by Mathis and under the helm of relative newcomer, the great Irish director Rex Ingram. Wags in the business referred to this as Metro's folly, thinking that a war picture was going to flop. Valentino and others were announced in the trade rags as cast in the film. Of course, trade rags are as accurate then as they are today, and Marjorie Rambeau had nothing to do with The Eyes of Youth, but at least Rudy got a mention. The filming was a unique one for all the players and for Valentino especially. With the support and guidance of both Rex Ingram and June Mathis, he turned in a performance that holds up 100 years later. The camaraderie of the crew and the cast is evident in many of the behind-the-scenes photos that exist of the film. Valentino and Alice Terry were good comrades. They certainly enjoyed making the film together. It was a first for both of them to be in such a large production and in the lead. And not to spoilerize what happens to Valentino's character in the end, he posed for this gag shot. This was taken with his own camera and preserved by him in his personal collection of photos. One of which that I'm very happy to own. So just so you know, Julio dies in the end. And here Rex Ingram and June Mathis seem to be sharing a private joke. Not sure, but most of the cast is present and lots of the crew. Valentino's star was born with this film. You can see it in the portraits that he sat for Arthur Rice, who was the photographer for this one, and Nelson Evans. He had many, many photos taken in costume, and they're all absolutely electrifying. His magnetic persona was obvious at last. So the next clip is a bit long, but I felt it was important to show it in its entirety because I truly feel that you can see a star being born. The tango was a dance that was popularized in part by Vernon and Irene Castle in 1914. Passion for the dance was reawakened with this famous sequence from the film, and forever after identified with this dance was, of course, Rudolph Valentino. The film that was previously sniggered at as Metro's folly became Metro's triumph when the film was released. Not only was Valentino hailed as a star, Alice Terry, director Rex Ingram, and June Mathis were all lauded. It played to record crowds in the US and across the globe. When it was released in March of 1921, at this time, films normally played 2 to 3 days in a theater run, a typical run. And that would be a successful film. Four Horsemen played for weeks and months, records that were not surpassed until 1922 when the epic Robin Hood starring Douglas Fairbanks premiered. And that famously screened at, I can't remember the theater on Hollywood Boulevard. In any case, the streetcars, rather than announcing the regular stop, they announced All Out for Robin Hood. And that tells you the power of the popularity of the film. Valentino made the cover of the most respected fan magazine a mere 4 months after the release of the film. His standing at Metro remained the same, unfortunately, a contract player at $350 a week. Being cast by Alla Nazimova as Armand to her Camille was a prestigious step up for him. Nazimova was no fool. She saw Valentino's star on the ascent just as hers was starting to decline. This film also introduced him to the woman who some say destroyed his career, or at least made it really, really hard for him, and that was Natasha Rambova. Here are a couple of examples of Natasha's designs, the avant-garde sets for Camille. It was very stylized, and he was highly praised for his part in the film. And here are Rudy and Natasha with his pet monkey, whose name I can't recall, and one of her Pekingese, this might have been Chucky, a puppy that he'd gifted to her. And this is in her shared bungalow circa 1921, where they were living in sin. Metro cast Valentino again under the direction of Rex Ingram and paired him again with Alice Terry in The Conquering Power. This gag shot belies the tensions that crept onto the set for this film. Valentino was ambitious and felt very slighted, particularly after his role was cut in favor of Alice Terry. Although the Balzac novel, Eugenie Grandet, she is the title character. He was unhappy with Metro. He made another film called Uncharted Seas, which is lost. The plot is ridiculous. The stills are great. But he was unhappy. Metro seemed not interested, or he did not feel valued. He was then on the market, and he successfully negotiated a one-picture deal with famous player Lasky. And that film was the lead role in a film based on the hottest book of 1920 by author E.M. Hull, and it was the film The Sheik. Now, Hull's novel, The Sheik, was scandalously racy and horribly racist. Naturally, the final scenario had cut the most uncensorable material from the multiple rapes to the awful racism. The raping, of course, was implied. Valentino and Agnes Ayres mugged relentlessly to imply passion, revulsion, and finally love. The film is not entirely as camp as some of the stills shot for the film suggest. However, that said, the use of pistols and knives were not exactly subtle references to what the film could only vaguely allude to due to the censorship laws. Next up was a film shot in San Francisco, yay, and Valentino thoroughly enjoyed making Miranda the Lady Letty. He was more natural and naturally virile as the Shanghai socialite. He enjoyed not wearing a lot of makeup and filming outdoors in San Francisco on the Bay and around the Bay Area. It's a sleeper of a film and well worth watching. Now, Valentino and Rambova, while vacationing in Palm Springs, they impulsively crossed the border to Mexicali and got married. And of course, Valentino, upon his return to the US and Los Angeles, was surprised to learn that the marriage in Mexico made him a bigamist in the eyes of the law. Natasha hot-footed it to the East Coast to disappear from the press and any scrutiny. And Rudy fought the charges out on his own here in LA. His good friend, Douglas Gerard, who was a director and sometimes actor, made calls for friends, and Thomas Meehan and June Mathis raised the necessary cash that bailed him out of jail. He was forever grateful for that as well. Loyalty among his friends was a wonderful thing. When it came to the divorce from Jean Acker, it did not help matters that scanty art photographs by Natasha's friend Helen and his friend Helen McGregor were used in evidence. These were later published in a theater magazine, and it was Natasha's idea to dress him as the faun in the Nijinsky ballet L'après-midi d'un faun. Undaunted by his legal and marital troubles, Valentino posed for publicity photos as both a happy Italian and lonesome lover for the fan magazines. His male friends rallied round him in support, while he and Natasha kept in contact by coded telegrams and long-distance phone calls. Valentino was also happy because his newly signed contract and his next film, that he would star with the biggest movie star on Paramount's lot, which was Gloria Swanson. And here he is at his home in Whitley Heights with some of his buddies. That's Douglas Gerard on the left, Rudy, director Jean Delamure, and Robert Flory on the right. Beyond the Rocks apparently was a very happy set by the sheer number of gag photos that exist. Valentino posing with Madame Eleanor Glynn, who is seen here next to Gloria Swanson, and between director Sam Wood. Swanson spoke fondly of Valentino, and Madame Glynn, in some of the existing photos with Rudy, looks like she was a little smitten as well. Swanson, of course, received star billing, and Valentino had his last featured player billing with this film. His next film would be a star vehicle, which he pinned a lot of hopes on, and that would have been Blood and Sand. But in the meantime, he appeared in divorce court to divorce Jean Acker, and she was attempting to hang on to his name and squeeze some money out of him, as her own star had fallen as his had skyrocketed. He did have to end up paying her money, but the divorce was granted, and it would not be finalized for another year. Valentino had asked for George Fitzmaurice to direct Blood and Sand. Fitzmaurice turned it down. Fred Niblo, who had recently directed Douglas Fairbanks in The Mark of Zorro, was assigned, and the scenario was again in good hands of June Mathis. It was another Blasco Ibanez spectacular, based on the book and the play that Paramount had the rights to. Paramount was certainly hoping that the film would repeat this kind of success that Metro had had with Four Horsemen, and they were not disappointed. The film was a massive success. Valentino, on the other hand, was disappointed because the film, he thought, should have been shot in Spain, and he had, grand ideas that it should have been much more authentic than it was, rather than being shot out at the Paramount Ranch. But what was the straw that broke his back was the Young Raja. It was a cheaply made hodgepodge, and quite frankly was just too much for him. He went on strike, broke his contract, and it would be 2 years before the dust had settled and he appeared on screen again. Unfortunately, Valentino made a very poor business decision, because once he did go on strike, Paramount did make him an offer and pretty much granted him what he wanted, including a huge salary raise. Inexplicably, he turned it down. So during his town time, he dabbled in writing poetry. He inked a deal with McFadden Publications, and he went on a tour which was called the Mineral Lava Tour. He had to make money, and because of injunctions in the court battle with Paramount, he couldn't appear on screen. He couldn't even appear on stage. So he had to fight back, and in court, the injunction was reduced, although for the Mineral Lava Tour, which was very successful. He earned $7,000 a week and traveled across country in a grueling tour in a beautiful Pullman car. Still, it was very hard work, and they were not dancing in theaters, they were dancing in armories, tent shows, and even hotel ballrooms. But at least he was making money. And it introduced him to a man who would become his business manager. His name was George Ullman. And the tour ended in early June of 1923. It run for about 3 months. The final was in New York in November. And here he's pictured with the 5 ladies, the winner, of course, wearing the crown, and the four runners up. And the woman on the second to the right, I actually have her local Baltimore trophy in my collection. Her name was Mildred Adams. Alas, did not win the big trophy, but you know, it just was a whole interesting thing. And this, of course, predated the, quote, Miss America pageant by a couple of years. After the grueling tour, the Valentinos, settled their differences with Paramount, was contracted for 2 more films, and they went on vacation. This was Valentino's first return to Europe, 10 years virtually almost 10 years to the day after he left Italy. And they spent 3 months in Europe. And he visited with his family. That is, he is there pictured with his nephew, Jean, on whom he doted. And he also paid visit in Rome to Emily Yannings, who was filming Quo Vadis at the time. On the return trip to the US, he also shared passage with George Arliss. There are photos of he and George Arliss. When he returned to New York, he signed his final contract with Adolf Zucker, and they posed for several photos to commemorate this. His next 2 films would be shot at the Paramount Astoria studio on Long Island, and the first being Monsieur Beaucaire. He worked very hard on the film. Natasha helped design costumes, although not all were designed by her. And the cameraman was Harry Fishbeck, who did some beautiful lighting in the film. It was not a film that his hardcore fans were expecting. It was less dangerous and more comedy of manners with swordplay, and a seriously confusing number of leading ladies. Pardon me, that's my cat. Excuse me. Valentino did enjoy practicing swordplay, and this Fairbanksian aspect was much publicized. The film did well in the US, moderately so. It was a blockbuster in London, however. It played for quite some time there, and it was well received. His next film and his final for his contract was A Sainted Devil, which was pretty much an abject failure at the box office. What might have happened to his career had he accepted the new contract in 1922 and not spent 2 years off screen, we will never know. But he was now looking forward to becoming an independent. And he signed with newly formed Ritz-Carlton Productions. He was the star player, so to speak. And the first film he wanted to make was one that was written by Natasha, and it was called The Hooded Falcon. And it was set in Moorish Spain. But Williams, being the businessman, indicated that they needed to get product out right away and suggested a film based on a successful play called Cobra. Valentino was unhappy, but needs must. And it looks like it was at least a fun set. Here he is reunited with director Joseph Henneberry. And this was a rare film in that Valentino did not get the girl. The Valentinos then, after this film was made, before the film was in the can, they went back to Europe and spent a boatload of money on props and gifts and things for the Hooded Falcon. And this proved to be too much for J.D. Williams, and their partnership was quickly dissolved. Cobra was released later in 1925 and died a very quick death at the box office. Not a success. Valentino was guided by, at this point now, by power broker Joseph Sheik. He was invited to join Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks at United Artists. His first film was to be a riff on the Mark of Zorro, so to speak, a Russian version called The Eagle. It was based on a short story by Pushkin. And Valentino and Clarence Brown got on like a house on fire. They both loved anything mechanical and had loads to talk about and became very good friends while making this film. Valentino played 3 roles in the film. Well, if you count the French tutor, yeah, 3 roles. And it's, along with Beaucaire, there's quite a bit of comedy in the film, and he really had a wonderful light touch, and working with the director of Brown's stature really helped him a lot, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. Not only did he get along with Clarence Brown, Clarence Brown's young daughter, Adrienne, was clearly smitten with Valentino. This is one of my favorite photos of all time. And while filming The Eagle, Valentino's marriage to Natasha Rambova crumbled. They staged a very public farewell for the camera and claimed it was a marital vacation. It would be another 6 months and both would be free of one another, Natasha having obtained a divorce that was granted on her birthday in 1926 in January. While Valentino continued to push for the Hooded Falcon, and it was actually in development, he made the reluctant return to the character of the Sheik. The Sons of the Sheik is a Frances Marion adaptation of the E.M. Hall sequel novel called The Sons of the Sheik. She condensed the 2 sons into one, and Valentino finally got his wish to work with George Fitzmaurice. He was also reunited with the charismatic Vilma Banky as his romantic partner. Again, he did not want to do this film, but again, needs must, and he went into it with not so much relish, but commitment, and gave a really fine performance. The film itself is much more sophisticated than the 1921 original Sheik. It has a lot more tongue-in-cheek, lightness, and everyone seemed to be in on the joke. The rape in this film was not only one of power, but it was of revenge, misguided as it was. This is a really long scene. I regret I couldn't add more of it. But you can see how much more sophisticated this is for a film at the end of the silent era. Fitzmaurice really did a lovely job, and the photographer, I think it was George Barnes, really captured how nice it was. Again, Valentino approached this film with a lack of enthusiasm, but he worked hard, and he thoroughly enjoyed being reunited with Agnes Ayres from the original film, where they restaged the capture from the first film. He also enjoyed playing the dual role of the Sheik, the elder Sheik. He reportedly delightedly walked around the back lot in costume as the elder Sheik and was just thrilled that nobody recognized him. He created 2 distinct characters for this film, and he really ended up enjoying it. At this time, Valentino was also personally happy. His family was visiting. They crossed back over with him in January and stayed until July. The young boy, Gene Valentino, remembered great times at Falconer with his uncle. As an aside, Gene Valentino grew up to be an Emmy Award-winning sound man. He also designed custom stereo systems under the name Valentino Electronics. One of his clients, and I believe the consoles still survive, were built for Frank Sinatra. No doubt, being mechanically minded himself, Uncle Rudy would have approved of that. His next film was to be based on the life of Cesare Borgia, based on the Raphael Sabatini book. Jack Dempsey's wife, seen here in the center of this photo with Dempsey in New York. Estelle Taylor was going to be cast as his lead. Unfortunately, Valentino would not live to see the film made. These are 2 of the last photos taken of him in Chicago before he fell ill. His anger and stress at the Pink Powder Puff editorial no doubt exacerbated the ulcers that he'd already suffered from. After returning to Chicago, oh, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. So he went to New York to attend the premiere of Son of the Sheik, and soon after collapsed in his hotel. The hospital was flooded with telegrams, flowers, and there were the occasional attempted visitor trying to visit on the floor where he was being treated. He had 2 surgeries where they discovered the ulcers, and unfortunately, you know, he suffered greatly. And in the days before penicillin, he suffered a painful and terrible death. They had him on morphine, but it was just dreadful. He was felled by infection. And you can see in the last Daily Mirror photo how much torture he'd gone through. That he was only 31 years old made it all the more shocking. And tributes from all across the world came, including Mechanic Magazine, who dedicated an entire page of their magazine in tribute. And the children in the Italian neighborhood at a makeshift shrine at Villa Penza, which was a restaurant that he loved to frequent in New York when he visited. Valentino's funeral is widely considered to be the first big, quote, celebrity death event. The crowds in New York were enormous. You can see here outside of Campbell's, where when they announced that people would be allowed in to view his beer, just swamped the place. They were, you know, set out in lines for blocks and blocks and blocks. It's estimated that it's between 80 and 100,000 people viewed the body. Just astounding, considering these people were fully dressed, and you know that it was during an awful heat wave as well. And here's a brief glimpse of the funeral or the crowds. Valentino had two funerals, both of which you could see snippets from in that video clip. The first was in New York at St. Malachi's, and the second one was in Hollywood at the Church of the Good Shepherd. This to me sums up the shock and disbelief of Valentino's shocking early death. It's Mary Pickford exiting Valentino's funeral in Hollywood. Her face says it all. This was one of his last formal portraits by Henry Waxman. And this is how I like to remember him. His last farewell, leaving Chicago for New York. His remarkable fame continues today with a very solid and active fan base on social media. I think he'd be well pleased. And thank you very much for listening. I hope it was informative and not too boring.
Well, it certainly wasn't boring. Thank you very much for that. We're just to say we've come up to the advertised time, but I know there's lots of questions, so hopefully people will be able to stay. If you can't stay, the event is being recorded and you'll be sent a link after the in a couple of hours when the link's settled. Just before I go on to questions, I'll just say that we have this is just one of a series of events we're doing, and we have a couple next week that might be of particular interest to people who are listening. We have one on Tuesday on Limehouse, the history of Limehouse, which is the area of London that used to be the Chinatown of London, and where I believe Broken Blossoms is set, as mentioned earlier. So fans of Opium Dens will like that one. And on Wednesday, we have a talk on probably the other greatest silent film star who kind of didn't make it in the sound era, Lon Chaney. We have a talk about him, and it ties in with Eleanor Glynn, who was also mentioned today. I didn't really plan all this, but it works very well. So don't go away and book now, but after the event, please go and book for those. Okay, so we have quite a lot of questions here. Okay, Jose Arroyo makes a point based on one of the very early photos. Was he trying to pass himself off as a Marquess at some point?
Yeah, I would say yes, because as far as I know, he was not of noble blood. The cards were certainly presented to open doors for him, shall we say. I have not done enough genealogical research to verify if there was an actual marquis title that was legitimate.
Quite a few people, Phil Sugden, Grace Ann, and Jane, ask about his voice. Do we know anything about his voice? I mean, I know there's that one recording of him singing.
Yes, he made yeah, he did two songs, the Kashmiri love song and a Spanish song called El Relicario. It's a little bit hard to judge from the recordings. Had he made another visit to the recording studio after 1925, once electric microphones had come in, we'd have a better judge of what he sounded like. Several of his co-stars related that he had a continental accent, not terribly thick, although if you listen to both of the songs that he recorded, you can hear some of the Italian coming through, like in the Kashmiri love song where he says, whom do you lead along rapture's roadway far? It's umba instead of whom. And you can hear more of the accent in the Spanish song as well. So I would say he spoke English very well from what everyone said, but he did have an accent.
So any speculation on whether his career could have lasted?
My fantasy has always been that he would have played Dracula. It would have been, as a pre-code film, it would have been very different from Lugosi, because I think he was a lot more subtle an actor than Lugosi to play the seductor Dracula. However, as we all can pretty much guess, at least in Hollywood, by the time sound came in, his type of role was on the outs. The European kind of socialite or European period was more of a buffoon character, particularly once screwball comedies came in. And, you know, the likes of Nils Astor, who gave a spectacular performance in The Bitter Tea of General Yen, his career went nowhere. But Valentino himself had wanted to go behind the camera. He recognized when he was making Son of the Sheik that his days of being a screen lover were very short-lived. And he had hoped to be a producer by that time, and not necessarily on screen. He wanted to direct and produce. So hard to say. I think he probably wouldn't have survived in the talkies, much like John Gilbert. He probably would have.
Well, I suppose this Raymond Navarro's the obvious equivalent. He didn't really make it past about 1935. Is poor Tango okay? I know Tango's been not well, so hopefully she's not too much pain.
No, she's complaining she's not getting attention.
Jennifer Lashley says that the dancing scene will get a 10 from Len Goodman, which I think we'd all agree. And we have the Royal Academy of Dance who asked, do we know about the choreographer for the tango scene?
You know, I don't know. I have no idea who choreographed it. And even, you know, Valentino's partner there, Beatriz Dominguez, who tragically died before the film was released, didn't even get credit.
Francis says, when did he change his name to Valentino? And do we know why he picked that version of his name? Did he choose it himself? Was it chosen for?
I believe he chose it for himself. I mean, his name went through several iterations between 1916, when he started dancing, up until 1922. I mean, for Blood and Sand and The Young Raja, he had requested the changing of his spelling from Rudolph to Rodolph. And he was, you know, Di Valentina, Di Valentino, Valentino. It went through several names, and he settled on Valentino, I guess around 1919.
I mean, it is a great name. I mean, I don't think anyone can deny that. I think that's part of the reason he's remembered. It's such a great name.
Yeah.
Keith Douglas asked, does the script or scenario or whatever it would have been in those days for the Hooded Falcon survive? Do you have any thoughts about what it would have been like?
I don't think the scenario survives complete. I think there's a version out there. I've not seen it. I know that Natasha, you know, penned the first one, and then in between, when Valentino was with Ritz-Carlton and then United Artists, it was being adjusted by June Mathis. But beyond that, I really don't know.
There's quite a long comment here, which I won't read out in full, but I'll send it to you, Donna, because it's really interesting. So Martin Russell says that, who appears to be in America, says his grandfather, a Jewish Russian emigre, was in New York prior to 1914, came to England in May 1914, and we know that our grandfather was a social tango dancer. And they believe that the grandfather did know Valentino and did meet him on a visit to England. And Martin Russell's grandmother says that the family story is that the grandfather died aged 34 on August 24th, 1926, with an existing heart condition, but the heart attack was thought to be brought on by the shock of hearing of the death of his friend Rudolph Valentino. We've no pictures to corroborate this, but would you have any clues as to whether there's correspondence between Rudolph Valentino and a Nathan Holmstock of London?
I don't know of any. The bulk of Valentino's private correspondence that survives is with the family. They have several letters from Rudy and from his sister-in-law and his brother and his mother. Any other letters I've seen, a fair number to his friend Federico Beltran Mas, the Spanish painter who painted 2 portraits of him, and odd letters here and there, but I don't know of any.
I think it's an interesting story because we also, Vanessa commented that it's amazing to see so many men at the funeral crowd, because he's always thought of as a woman's matinee idol.
Well, you know, he was very popular with everybody. I think part of his problem, at least with the American male public was that he was, as Alan Dwan related in the Kevin Brownlow Hollywood series, the women looked at Valentino and was like, I like that, and basically, why aren't you like that? And I think that was the problem. The women certainly fed into the fantasy, whatever they projected on screen, and then they projected it onto their husbands or boyfriends, and it makes sense that he would not be popular in that respect.
On the subject of the funeral, Gloria LaLumia says the PR people built up the funeral crowds by holding the lines back so more people could be stacked up. That sounds quite plausible, to be honest. It still looks like a large amount of people, but who knows how it was directed for the newsreels.
Well, I mean, I have photos that I published in my book. There are several photos that show the crowds that, they were staged. The crowds are having a wonderful time. They're smiling and laughing. But it was also, they had to bring out extra police on horseback to control the crowds because the way Frank Campbell organized the viewing, they were literally, people were just walking in a circle or horseshoe around Valentino's casket and getting less than a second to view him because they were just trying to funnel people through there so quickly because there were, 20, 30, 40,000 people out there waiting to get in. And they were doing this in the daylight and through the evening. So while it may have been organized, by his manager, it's still, the crowds were huge. I mean, it was one of the largest funerals outside of a presidential funeral in the United States at that time.
Yes, I bet. Gloria also says in El Vicario, you can hear a bit of spoken word in the middle of the piece, and you get a sense of his accent. Apparently, he sounds like Gloria's grandfather did, which I'm guessing is not completely American. Yeah, Gloria also says it would have been quite hard for him to have been a producer since he wasn't really very good with money. So, okay. Yeah, I thought this was probably going to come up in Ken Russell's film about Valentino, the one with that's Nureyev, isn't it? The information is that he was bisexual. Is there any substance to this? I mean, you kind of have to say when do you get time, but
it's hard to say. Any of the stories about or questions about Valentino's sexuality really started to gain traction in the 1960s, and that was with the first publication of a cheap paperback by Brad Steiger and a fan group organizer by the name of Chaumank. And Chaumank went back to the 20s. And it's hard to say. I mean, everything that I've uncovered in my 35, close to 40 years of 40 years of research on Valentino, including being fortunate I don't have to talk to some people who knew him, and this was in the late 70s when they were still alive. Everyone denied that he was anything but heterosexual, including my friend Tom, who was a dancer on Broadway and who was gay and said he wasn't. But this is a question that I think will never really be settled. I don't think he was anything other than heterosexual, but if there was any bisexuality in him, nobody's come forward to state it with authority and proof.
Suzanne just asked, how was was Four Horsemen, the dance scene, scandalous at the time? Because it's interesting. Points out that it's interesting to see how far apart they dance the tango. The female is possibly bending over towards him. Probably the moral decency of the time would not have allowed the hip touching style of today. So was it scandalous?
I don't think so. It was spectacular, is what it was. I mean, that was truly the star-making sequence of the film. It certainly was not censored, as far as I know. And at least in the U.S., that would depend on state-by-state censorship boards. So what was permitted in Ohio may not have been permitted in, say, Texas. The film clip that I showed, of course, is the reconstruction by the great scholar and film historian Kevin Brownlow and David Gill. And they gathered the material from multiple prints to reconstruct it. I really can't say. I've not ever seen anything where they spoke of it being censored. The thing that I think would have been censored, and this is later on in the film, when Valentino, or the character Julio, has Alice Terry in his studio, and you can see it in stills and on the reissue lobby cards where Valentino is embracing her. He has his hand, just as he did with Nita and Haldy, right smack on her breast. I think that was probably much more censorable than the tango itself.
Paula's asking, how do you first get interested in researching Valentino?
When I first saw Blood and Sand. This is back when I was a young teen, and you couldn't see films except if they were on television. And our local public broadcasting station showed Blood and Sand. And I was like, wow, who is this person?
Wow.
And I mean, that was all part of when I was first learning about silent film. And I'd seen Chaplin and, you know, Fairbanks, but Valentino was it for me. It was like, wow, who is this guy?
So just to finish off, if people, I'm sure there's a lot of people now who are thinking they really need to see some more Valentino. So what's the one film you would say would be the beginner's Valentino film?
Well, of the ones that are out on DVD and Blu-ray, The Eagle is incredibly approachable. It's a well-made film. It's fun. It's romantic. And it's charming. The second would, of course, be Son of the Sheik, because it is, again, it's very stylish, and the clip I showed didn't really show the humor and the tightness of the script and the commitment of the performances by everybody. It's pure fantasy, and it's a fun movie. It's still tremendously entertaining, almost 90 years after its release. And I need to put a plug in. It's the best available version. If you have a multi-region player, although there is a DVD included in it, would be the one from Eureka Entertainment in the UK. It is the most beautiful print I've seen of the film, and it's well worth having it imported. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous print.
So that's a UK one. So quite a lot of the audience won't need to have it imported. So that's great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Donna. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for taking time in your morning to do it.
Thank you for inviting me. It was an honor.
Thank you. We'll hope to have you back to talk about somebody else. Okay, and there's lovely comments coming in, so we'll pass them all on to Donna afterwards. So thank you all, everybody, and hopefully see you back next week for either Limehouse or Lon Chaney. Thank you.